Hello and welcome to this Python tutorial. Today I will be showing you how you can create pivot tables using data that comes from Excel. By the end of this tutorial, we should have something that looks a bit like this, where we have the average salary split by gender and age. Cool. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is we need to get our Excel data. So what I've done is I've gone online and I've used a random data generator to create a small set of data here, which is 200 rows and by 7 columns. It says 201 because the first row is just headers. And these columns are first name, last name, gender, age, education, experience in years, salary, and number of children. I'm going to use this data to create that pivot table I showed you. So let's go back to our Python shell. First thing we need to do is import a module, and I've imported pandas, and pandas will be key to both importing the data from our Excel into Python and creating our pivot table. So this is our main module here. And then what we need to do is import our data from Excel into our Python shell. And we can do that first by using the read Excel function. But before that, what I've done is I've created a variable called Excel_file. Now I've given that this name as the name of my Excel document here. In this case, pivot table example.xlsx. You can check that by going to the top here. You can see that here. And that should match the name of this file here, which it does. And I've put this also in quotation marks. And it's just an easier way for me to reference my Excel file name. The next thing I've done is typed in pd.read_excel, pd.read_excel. And then in brackets, I've typed in Excel file, calling the name of the Excel file we want to import, comma, sheet name equals random, because here at the bottom, you can see the sheet name is random, so we need to correctly reference the right sheet we want. And then, comma, index cols equals 0. And then close brackets. And what we can do now is we can check that we've got all the information imported by doing a quick print of that variable. So print Excel data, and we can see if we've got 200 rows and 7 columns of information. And we can see at the bottom here that we do 200 rows by 7 columns. So good, it's all imported into our Python shell. That's brilliant. Now we need to create our pivot table. So what I've done is I've also utilized the PD in terms of the pandas module. And so I've typed in pd.pivot_table. And this function does exactly what it says, is it creates a pivot table. So if you open brackets, what we can do now is specify the data, which is Excel data, essentially the data that's in our Python shell now, comma, values equals salary, and salary is in quotation marks. So the values part is the values we want to get in the information about. So in this case, it is this average salary, which I showed you earlier. So one thing you've got to make sure when specifying columns from Excel is that the headers match to the headers in Excel. So capital S and spaces and so on. And so we can make sure here that we've got a capital S and we've got no sort of unusual spaces like salary space or space salary put in there. And we can see that it comes out all right. So values is what we're going to use to populate and get the information about. The next thing we've got to do is we're going to specify our rows, what rows we want to group the information by. In this case, it's age, which I showed you earlier. So we type in index equals, and then in square brackets, type in age, in also quotation marks. So square brackets and quotation marks, type in the name of the rows you want. In this case, it's age. So that's now specifying what rows we want. And we can do the same thing here with columns to specify what columns we want. In this case, it's gender. So columns equals, then square brackets and quotation marks, gender, and then comma, and then this is the key bit. We have to aggregate it somehow, because we're creating a pivot table, not just sort of our raw data in a different way. So we use a function called agfunc, which stands for aggregate function, and this is a way in which we're going to group our information together. And so in this case, what I've done is I've imported the NumPy module as NP, because that's a really useful way of, another way of doing sort of mathematics and stuff. And so we type in agfunc equals np.average, so numpy.average. So that uses the average function in the NumPy module to create an average of the values which we specified. And then it's going to split it by gender in the columns and age in the rows. So what we can do now is we can print this final table, and we will have our pivot table created. That's our pivot table. We have columns as gender, and we have our age as rows. And let me just show you how we can sort of change this around a bit. So let's go back to our Excel data, and let's specify, let's add education instead of our age as our rows. So what we can do is we can just go into our index, and where we specified rows, we just change it to education, making sure that our headers match. And then we can rerun it, and we will now have education instead of our age. And see here we have our education listed instead. And what's even better is that we can have we can split it multiple ways. So instead of having, we can not just have it the columns by gender and education, we can have sort of the rows by education, and let's split it another way, and number of and let's have gender as our rows instead. Let's do that. Gender as our rows instead, and we'll just have our columns as nothing. So let's run that and see what happens. Here, see, we've got multiple rows now. We've split it multiple ways in our rows, twice, and we've got rid of our columns completely. So we've got education rows by gender and education. And we can also flip that around. Let's say you wanted the gender split first and then the education. We can just swap it around. We can go gender and education. Cool. And let's say we wanted to change it. Instead of average, we wanted the sum. We want to calculate the total salaries. So you just type in np.sum, and we can rerun it, and we'll get the sum instead. So hopefully you've have a bit of understanding now of how to use pivot tables in Python. And let me know how you get on. Comment below if you're having any problems, and I'll try to help you out. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.